Welcome back to another episode of Kavanaugh's Corner. Today on the channel, I'm going to be talking about a movie that's very near and dear to my heart. And honestly, it's a movie that I think needs to be talked about more. And that is this movie right next to me. This is 2010 with the subtitle, The Year We Make Contact. Now, 2010 is I don't want to say little-known sequel, but a lot of people don't know about it. It's the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the reason why I'm making this video is because there's not a lot of stuff out there concerning 2010. And now, much like 2001: A Space Odyssey, it really, is a sci-fi film in its own category. 2001, to me, is one of the greatest films ever made. And it, hands down, in my opinion, is the greatest sci-fi film ever made. I think it's right up there with Blade Runner, the original Star Wars films. Without 2001, we wouldn't have science fiction films as they are today. They just wouldn't exist. And honestly, I think 2010 is another film in that category that is absolutely outstanding. Now, does it raise as many eyebrows as 2001? Absolutely not. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 is in a league of its own. There is no other film in this world that I can think of that compares to that film in a lot of different ways. People still talk about that movie today. What does some of the imagery mean? What is the overall theme of the film? A lot of things. You could talk about that movie for days on end and still never get anywhere. And I love that film, and I remember seeing it when I was about 5 or 6 years old, like 1994, 1995, and being absolutely flabbergasted by it. I just didn't know what the hell to make of it. And I remember enjoying it somehow. When I was a kid, I actually enjoyed it, but I didn't know what to make of it. And I watched it quite a few times over and over and over, but never really got anywhere with it. And I revisited it many years later and then was like, okay, all right, I kind of like this. Kind of boring, but I like it. And now, as I've gotten, more critical of film over the years, it is one of my favorite films of all time, as I mentioned earlier. And 2010, I saw many years after I saw 2001. I actually didn't even know it existed until around 2005 or so, 2004, 2005. And I was in high school, and it was on TV, and I stumbled across it, and it was about a quarter of the way through, and I was blown away by it. It was just an amazing film, and I thought it looked familiar, and then I found out that Peter Hyams directed it, who, again, is one of my favorite directors. He also directed movies such as Time Cop, Sudden Death, some movies with Jean-Claude Van Damme, ironically enough. He did The Star Chamber with Michael Douglas. He did The Presidio, which is, again, one of my favorite action films. That's with Sean Connery and Mark Harmon. And he's just a damn good director. And his movies have their own look to them. And he also did a movie called Outland, which actually has a lot in common with this movie. Both outer space films. Outland stars Sean Connery. It's basically High Noon in space, if you can imagine that. Again, an outstanding movie. I love that movie. And, this is, again, in the same kind of vein as that. But Peter Hyams does something with 2010 that I think is venerable. And it's the fact that it is a straightforward sequel to 2001 that does not get into heady territory. It does at certain times, but it handles the story in a very straightforward manner. And I think that's outstanding. And I love the way Peter Hyams tells the story in this film. And Roy Scheider is the main actor in the film. He plays Dr. Haywood Floyd, and he's just outstanding in it. Also in this movie, you get the return of Keir Dullea, who played Dave Bowman in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, I'm not going to spoil for you. I'm not going to go into detail about what happens in the movie, and I'm not going to spoil kind of his appearance or anything in the film, but he does play a very interesting part, especially if you've seen 2001 and you see what happens to his character at the end of that film. It's very interesting. John Lithgow is in this, and also my favorite actor in the film is Helen Mirren. Helen Mirren is very young. She's like 20 in this movie. She's very, very young. I know she's actually 20, but she's very young in this. She plays a Russian cosmonaut. And she is outstanding in this film as this Russian cosmonaut. And honestly, I forgot she was in this movie until I rewatched it very recently. And honestly, I have to say, this movie is aged like wine. Much like 1968's 2001, the special effects in this movie they're amazing. I do have to say there are some composite shots here and there that are a little off kilter. They're definitely not up to snuff of today's like CGI or anything. But this movie uses no CGI. Everything is in camera or some kind of optical effect, and I really, really love that in this movie. They do a wonderful job of displaying just how, practical special effects are done, much like the original 2001. Now, the other thing I want to mention in this movie is the fact that this movie is the direct continuation of 2001. So if you haven't seen 2001, you probably should before you go into this movie. Basically, the overall plot of the film, not to get into details, but the space station Discovery, which has been outside of Jupiter's moons from the original 2001, the monolith from that film is still kind of out there floating around Jupiter. And there's been some kind of activity on Jupiter. And Roy Scheider, who is the mission commander of the original mission from 2001, is kind of brought in to go out to the space station to see just what's going on out there. However, the Russians have also kind of tasked themselves to go to the space station, and they are going to make it first. So they join forces to kind of get there together to investigate what is going on with the mysterious monolith and what is happening on Io, which is one of Jupiter's moons. And that's pretty much all I'm going to tell you. That's really it. The movie came out in 1984, and the book was written, I think, earlier than that. So the movie is definitely not the future, or should I say the future is definitely not what the movie intended. The Soviets are still a thing in the future of 2010, and the Soviet Union is still going strong. And the background of this film is that there's an impending nuclear war between the United States and the Soviets, which in the 80s, all the way from the 60s to the 80s, was kind of a thing. That Cold War was really raging, especially in the 80s when Reagan was in the White House. And I have to say that the whole idea of, Russians in space working with, the Americans is kind of a bygone thing now. That's not really very important these days. But when this movie came out, it was a very hot topic thing. And that's really the number one thing that ages the movie, is some point to the plot about Russians and the Cold War and stuff. Today, it won't even kind of ring a bell with anybody, especially if you're younger than I am. You probably won't even know. You probably won't even know what the hell they're referencing when they talk about certain things in this film. But the sci-fi aspects of the film are amazing, and the movie does one thing that I absolutely love, is that it perfectly builds upon 2001. It really does a great job of kind of expanding the story from the original film and providing insight of what was going on at the end of the film. Now, some people do not like this film because it actually gives you answers in certain ways of what was happening at the end of 2001. I don't really agree with that. I think the movie does a wonderful job of kind of giving you more of that universe without getting into extreme detail. Again, they never really explain what the monolith is. They never find out what it's made of, what's going on. The only thing you get out of the movie is you get an unheard line that is from the original 2001 novel, but not from the 2001 movie, and it's the opening line of the film. There's no footage on screen. You hear Bowman from the original movie say, "My God, it's full of stars." And when I first watched this movie years ago and I heard that line, I went, "Ooh, that's creepy. Like, what is he talking about?" And as the movie goes on, you kind of learn more and more about the mysterious, nature of the monolith, and also you kind of get into detail about, what was happening at the end of 2001 without them really spelling it out for you, because honestly, it's meant to be an interpretive thing, and I think it's outstanding the fact that, Peter Hyams does not go and try to explain every little thing that happened at the end of 2001. You get some hints here and there, but you never get like a guy writing on a blackboard of what was going on at the end of 2001. You just get an expanded story and a continuation, which I absolutely love. And I think that's the best part about 2001. The ending is also something that I think is really, really it's just wonderful. And it gives you a sense of hope and enlightenment that I think the world needed in 1984, and I think actually, ironically enough, it needs again today. And I think watching the movie today, even though obviously Soviets don't exist anymore, kind of, and space travel is definitely not the number one thing on the list of things to do when it comes to this government. But I also think that it's a wonderful film about humanity and how people can work together to accomplish something amazing. Even though, governments don't agree, people in the end are all the same, no matter what your race is, no matter where you're from. It doesn't matter. We can all work together. And I think that's the most wonderful thing about 2010 is that story. And also the fact that there's some pretty intense shit in this movie. Yeah, there's some moments in this movie that are real nail-biters, and it gets you. The first time you watch it, it really does. It grabs hold of you because you don't know what's going to happen. And when Hal is reintroduced, you really don't know what he's going to do. And he's kind of the all bets are off character in this film. And they got the same gentleman that voiced Hal from the first one to come back for this one, which I thought was great. Also, little trivia for you, Candice Bergen is the voice of Sal, who is the female Hal that Bob Balaban, who plays the gentleman that created Hal, he's one of the main actors in this film as well. Another great actor who's also in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, another one of my favorite sci-fi films. Candice Bergen is the voice of Sal, even though she's not credited in the film. So if you watch this movie, listen for Candice Bergen. She does a really good job. Overall, 2010 is an outstanding film. Even though certain aspects of the film haven't aged well, I think it's an outstanding movie and definitely needs to be seen by more people. Go out and buy 2010 if you can find it. I picked this up for $5.99 at Best Buy, actually. It was $5.99, and this Blu-ray is outstanding. In terms of a regular Blu-ray, it is one of the best transfers I've seen of an older film, especially with a lot of special effects. They did a wonderful job over at Warner Brothers with this disc. I highly recommend it. It even has a little brief behind-the-scenes featurette, which is kind of cool because they interview Arthur C. Clarke, who passed away years ago. It's really cool to see. Anyway, I'm Andrew Kavanaugh. Thank you for coming back to Kavanaugh's Corner. I'll see you next time. Good night.